Nvidia and AMD are reportedly required to pay a 15% fee in order to export to China. American experts have slammed Trump for his outrageous money-grabbing tactics. After the China-US negotiations in Sweden, the agreement was not made public for some time. On August 12, both sides finally released a joint statement on the China-US Stockholm economic and trade talks. The U.S. side pledged to continue suspending the 24% reciprocal tariffs on China for 90 days starting immediately, while China also promised to suspend the 24% additional tariffs on the U.S. and related non-tariff countermeasures for 90 days from the same date. This decision was welcomed by the American business community. Craig Allen, president of the U.S.-China Business Council, said that this extension is crucial, and he hopes this move can provide more certainty for American companies in making medium and long-term investment and supply chain plans. On August 12, the Associated Press quoted analysts as saying that the Trump administration had imposed tariffs on almost every country on Earth, but had postponed the additional tariffs on China. The Associated Press believes that the U.S. government's desire to ease foreign trade tensions is actually a backlash from its previously arrogant policies. This decision to extend was initially reached after the third round of talks held in late July in Stockholm, the capital of Sweden, between Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, U.S. Treasury Secretary Burson, and U.S. Representative Greer. However, the final decision still needs to be made by the two countries' leaders. This update means that the latest deadline for the mutual imposition of high tariffs by both sides has once again been postponed to November 10. It is estimated that by then, the leaders of China and the U.S. may have already met. According to the Associated Press, the previously agreed truce period was originally set to expire at 12:01 a.m. on August 12. At that time, if the deadline is not extended, the U.S. may significantly increase tariffs on Chinese goods, and China may also retaliate strongly. Extending the deadline gives both sides more time to address their differences. According to the Associated Press, reaching a final agreement with China is something Trump wants to accomplish but has yet to achieve. However, since taking office, he has imposed tariffs on almost every country, which has already upended the global trade system. Other U.S. trading partners like the EU and Japan have accepted unequal agreements under U.S. pressure. For example, Japan and Europe agreed to pay a 15% tariff on goods exported to the U.S. This is to avoid even worse situations from happening. Yale University's budget lab in the U.S. estimates that the actual average tariff rate in the U.S. has surged from 2.5% at the beginning of the year to 18.6%, reaching the highest level since 1933. This has turned the U.S. from one of the world's most open economies into a fortress of protectionism. The report says that China has tested the limits of Trump's policy of using tariffs as a tool of coercion. China used its own means to fight back against the U.S., including imposing counter-tariffs and controlling rare earth exports, making the U.S. face up to reality. The report quotes Raymond, a senior legal advisor at the U.S. law firm Alabed and a former U.S. assistant diplomatic representative, as saying that the U.S. has realized it is not in a position of advantage. It seems that Trump hopes to reach an agreement with China before attending the APEC summit in South Korea at the end of October, paving the way for his subsequent visit to China. He said that a series of measures taken by both sides in recent months are all steps to build trust. Ali Huayin, a senior researcher on U.S.-China relations at the International Crisis Group, said that the Trump administration overestimated the ability of high tariffs to force China into making economic concessions. This not only highlights the limitations of the U.S.'s unilateral pressure, but also gives China reason to believe that they can use rare earth controls to maintain a long-term advantage in future negotiations. Now, as the U.S. government seeks diplomatic de-escalation, it is actually suffering the backlash of its own earlier arrogance. Huayin said that recent U.S.-China negotiations have revealed two interdependent asymmetries. In the short term, it may be much easier for China to innovate and break through U.S. chip restrictions than for the U.S. to shake off its dependence on Chinese rare earths. In this asymmetry, the U.S. is at a disadvantage. To sum up, first, Trump has to accept another 90-day delay on new U.S.-China tariffs, once again proving that the U.S. has overestimated its own capabilities. The U.S. has finally realized that China will not yield, and Trump simply cannot afford the cost if China cuts off supplies to the U.S., such as rare earths. Second, Trump is very eager for the U.S. and China to reach an agreement before the end of October, so that he can visit China smoothly. Third, in the future, the U.S. and China may only be able to reach a limited agreement, and the two economic and trade conflicts may continue in different forms for years to come. However, China holds the upper hand, because China will be able to overcome the bottleneck in chip technology faster than the US can solve its rare earth problem. In addition, Trump has taken making money through trade restrictions to a ridiculous level. Earlier, the Financial Times revealed that US chip companies Nvidia and AMD have agreed to hand over 15% of their China chip sales revenue to the US government in exchange for export licenses to China issued by the Trump administration. This news has left the public stunned. US media exclaimed that the government's practice of demanding a share of company revenues in exchange for export licenses is truly unprecedented. At the White House press conference held on August 11th, Trump confirmed this matter and even disclosed more details about the private negotiations. Trump admitted that it was he who asked Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang to pay a fee for the license to export chips to China. And initially, he proposed to take 20% of the sales revenue. Trump said, at the time, "I said, if you want me to approve your exports to China, I want to take 20% of the revenue. This is for our country, not for myself." At that point, Jensen Huang asked, "Can we lower it to 15? So we ended up making a little deal. As for concerns that Trump's approval of this deal might compromise national security, he himself didn't seem to think much of it. To prove his point, Trump described Nvidia's H0 chips, which have recently resumed exports to China, as outdated chips. He also said that China's Huawei already has some chips with performance similar to the H0 chips. Trump then went on to say that he plans to negotiate a new deal with Wang Wenfeng, allowing Nvidia to sell chips based on its latest and most advanced backflow platform to China, but only on the condition that their performance is cut by 30 to 50%. It's just like selling fighter jets. According to the Financial Times, citing US officials, Nvidia will share 15% of its revenue from selling H-series chips in China. AMD will also hand over an equivalent proportion of revenue from selling its MI308 AI chips to the US government. Two people familiar with the matter said that the Trump administration has not yet decided how to use this money. In the fiscal quarter ending April 17th, H-series chips brought Nvidia $4.6 billion in revenue. But due to previously implemented restrictions, there are still $2.5 billion worth of products that have not been delivered. Based on this calculation, if normal trading levels can be restored, the US government could earn $1 billion from this transaction every quarter. Morgan Stanley also estimates that if the restrictions are lifted, AMD's revenue in 2025 could increase by $3 to $5 billion. Bloomberg believes that this kind of arrangement reflects Trump's usual approach, making trade concessions in exchange for financial returns for the US. However, in the history of modern business, there are almost no precedents for such selective export taxes. Trump's approach has even surprised himself. John Molinar, a Michigan Republican congressman and chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, who has consistently supported raising export restrictions to China, said he is concerned about the US government taking a cut from chip sales to China. There are questions about the legal basis for this approach. Export controls are the only frontline defense for protecting US national security, and the US should not set such a precedent. Sources also told the Financial Times that some security officials are considering resigning in response to Trump's move. He said that the purpose of export control officials going to work every day is not to sell out national security. One of them said that these actions would cause lasting damage to the US export control system, which was already struggling to begin with. Lott, a senior fellow at the Center for a New American Security in Washington, was even more outspoken, calling this move downright absurd. If selling H-type chips to China really poses a national security risk, then the US shouldn't have sold them in the first place. If it doesn't pose a national security risk, then why are we imposing extra penalties on this kind of sale? Former US trade official Stephen Olson said that calling this unusual or unprecedented would be an understatement. What we're actually seeing is the monetization of US trade policy. US companies have to pay the US government in order to get an export license. If that's really the case, the US is stepping into a whole new and dangerous world. In conclusion, Trump acts without any rules, applies double standards, and changes according to his own whims. But one thing never changes: he's always out to grab money wherever he can. As for the long-term damage this kind of behavior does to America's soft power, Trump simply couldn't care less.